Hey guys, welcome back to today's video where I'm going to be showing you how I made this lovely dress out of scrap fabrics. So I've been working with a lot of tools lately, but I have a lot of scrap and I wanted to dispose them. Then I decided to use them for a dress for my niece who is around 5 years or so. So without further ado, let's head into it. So I'm going to be pressing down all my scrap fabrics. Like I said, I'm going to be using scrap, so I need to press them down because most of them I had already even squished them and put in like a bag that I was ready to dispose. So here is the tulle or net material that I have, and then here is my satin fabric I'm going ahead to press. So I'm going to fold the satin in half and I'll mark her half length measurement. That's from her shoulder to somewhere around her belly button. Now for me, I'm going above the belly button a little bit, then I'm going to be marking her shoulder to armhole, right? That's the line I'm marking. So I have my shoulder line and my armhole line, right? So on my shoulder line, I'm going to be marking half of her shoulder measurement. So you should measure the child you're working with, right? So for me, I'm going to be working with 6.5 inches. Then I mark the same thing on the shoulder length and I drew it into a straight line. Then I marked my shoulder slant, which was 1 inch, and I marked 2.5 inches for the neck opening, and I connected my shoulder slant. So the next thing I'll be doing is to mark a quarter of the bust measurement, and I'll be placing that on the armhole side, right? Then I mark my sewing allowance. Now then I mark the same thing on the waist side or the affluence side, and I draw it into a straight line. Then I find half of my armhole line, then I go in by 1 inch, then I make a curve to give me my armhole curve. It's pretty simple. So cutting an outfit for a child. Now I want the neck to open a little bit more, so I'm marking an extra 1 inch to give a total of 3.5 inches opening. Now the blouse style is going to be a surplice neck or a wrap neck, whatever you prefer to call it. So for that, I'm not going to be making the opening yet. Now I will go down by 3 inches and I made a curve. Now I'm going ahead to cut out my neck measurement, so that will be one side of the front. I'm going to use that to cut out my back. So I just laid it and left my back zip allowance like so. That's what I'm cutting out. And then because I want the back neck to be higher, I'm going up. I'm not going to cut it by 3 inches depth. I'll just use 1 inch, then I'll cut the exact same thing on every other side of the back. So that is the reason why I made the front like this, because I'm not working with pattern, right? So by the time I'm done, I'm going to open the front side up for you to see. So I'm going to be I'm not going to be using this front side as it is like so. So what I'm going to be doing is to turn it into a surplice neck, right? Now I want my back neck to be deep, so on my armhole line I'm just going to trace off my line there so that I know how deep I want my back. You can do your back deeper or higher, whichever works for you. I just went ahead to make a curve so that the back can be a little bit deep, and I cut it out like so. So you can see that I have like a deep back already. Now I'll open my front and make the surplice neck. Now you can just cut it from anywhere you like, but make sure that you don't go too deep so that the child's bust is not left outside, right? So what you want to do is to maintain, I kind of maintained that 3.5 inches neck depth that I had. Then I'm cutting 2 panels. So to cut 2 panels is easy to make mistake here. What you want to do is to make sure that the right side of this panel is facing the right side of the fabric where you're facing. So if you're using the wrong side, make sure the wrong side is facing the wrong side as well. Then you go ahead and follow it up and cut out. Now what that means is I'm cutting 2 panels for my front and then 2 panels for my back. 2 panels for my back because of the zipper allowance, right? So this is what I have when I'm done cutting. You can see. Now what I'm going to do is to cross over the body like so, just like you can see. So from the midpoint, that line, I'm going to make a notch so that when I'm sewing I would know where I'm going to match for me to cross, right? So this is what the front looks like, and I'll be laying the back on it like so. Now you'll be wondering what we're going to be using our nets for. So the net is majorly going to be the bodies of the dress, because I don't want this satin to be visible. So now I'm going to bring all my net. Don't forget this is scrap, and then I love the orange in this tulle. Is the bright orange and is really beautiful. So what I'm going to do is to make pleats with it. So I'm just going to pleat and then I'll press. And you don't want your pressing iron to be very hot, because this is tulle, it does not tolerate heat that much. So you can pleat as much as possible before you, as many pleats as possible before you press. That's fine. Then you pin them down. This is very basic level draping, guys. So I'm just going to be draping the net by pinning down, just like you can see me do now. Because I said I'm going to be using scrap fabric, I'm definitely not going to get enough to get the pleat from the beginning till the end of my garment. So I'm going to be joining, I'm going to have to join along the line, but don't worry, because I'm going to cover the joining anyway. So you can see what I'm talking about. The fabric got exhausted just at this point, so I will not even, don't worry when you have the same issue. Just make sure you cut the upper side out and then you press it nicely. So what I will do is I'll bring back my pieces to like fold it and secure that place. Now I'll come back to add hemming gum in between that line and press it so that it holds it. Even after adding hemming gum, I later hand stitched it off camera. You can do that as well. Even if you do not do that, you leave the hemming gum alone, it's totally fine. You can see I have so many places where I patched, but it's not going to be visible at the end of the day. So this is me just going ahead to continue what I'm doing until I'm done doing one, so you can see what it looks like. I'll give it a nice press, and then make sure you're steaming it as you're pressing. So you can see I went ahead to put my hemming gum so that it holds that part and it lays flat and it doesn't show. Then I had an accident, my iron picked my tulle. That's why I was emphasizing make sure your iron is not hot. So but don't worry, I'll still bring another fabric and lay it over it, and then I'll conceal it. You won't even notice. So by the time I'm done, I went to go and stitch around before taking out my pins, and this is what it looks like on both sides. So you can see the place where I patched is not even visible at all. That's it on the lower layer. This layer, that's where I patched, right? So I would even put that side down like so. So this is it. On this other extreme is because of the sewing allowance, that's why I did not drape anything much there. Now back to my, I did the same thing for the back panel anyway. Back to the lower part of the skirt, I wanted to cut it as a flare at first, but I did not have enough fabric. Do not forget I'm working with scrap fabrics. So at the end of the day, I ended up cutting it as a straight line, and I'm going to gather it up, right? I'm using gathers instead of cutting it as flare. So I'm checking the length of the fabric all together, and that was when I went ahead to pretty much mark it as flare at first before I discovered it wasn't working. Then this is me folding it to go ahead and cut it as a straight fabric. So I just marked 18 inches, I guess, or 20 inches for the length, and then I cut it into two and I joined it together to give me a very long fabric. Then I went ahead to cut my nets. My nets are 2 inches longer than the satin, the black satin, right, for the lower side. So I cut out my net as a very long piece of fabric as well. So I had overall maybe I had about 6 layers of this net, right? Or if I'm not mistaken, maybe three, anything within 3 to 6. And I went ahead to cut out organza as well. So I just have these fabrics lying around, so instead of wasting them, I just put them together so that it gives that puffiness on the skirt. So I did the same thing for my organza. Now I'm going to head over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to be gathering this fabric together by sewing. There are two methods of gathering that I used here. You make a loose stitch, you sew it straight, and then you make a loose stitch and sew on your fabric, then you use the thread to draw out the fabric. Or another way that I find it easier, like is less taxing, it looks more difficult but it's not, is to tighten the stitch and like gather it with your hands as you're sewing on top of the gathering. That was what I eventually did for the net, right? So I discovered that this was a much more easier task to do. So if you have a gathered foot, go ahead and use your gathered foot, but for me this is the foot that I'm going to be using. So now this is me gathering the one that drawing the one that came with the stitch that I made. So when I'm done, I'm going to join from the hem side like this so that I form a skirt. I'll go ahead and sew. Now the trick to sewing net is that you don't back stitch from the beginning. You'd rather take it out of the machine and start over again, but you do not back stitch. Now when I have like 6 inches, I'm going to stop 6 inches towards the hem. That will be where my zipper is going to fit in. So I just trimmed off the excesses and I left 6 inches opening so that my zipper can fit. When I trimmed into this, I turned it back to the wrong side and I'm going to top stitch on where I stitch like this. This is just a way I sew nets, since it's not like I'm going to have to overlock it. Remember, it's still, so this is just my way of working with it and cleaning off the raw edges. You can go ahead and overlock if it works for you, but it doesn't work for me. So this is what I have. You can see it's nice and clean. So I'm going ahead to do the same thing to every other part, the organza, the main skirt and everything else. I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'll gather it and then I'll sew from the hem all the way down. Now for the satin material, I did not do the gathering. I ended up doing pleats, but you can do gathering, it's still fine, anyone that works best for you. But because I wanted it something that works, that's easier, because I had just a few hours to deliver this dress for my niece because she was going to use it as her Christmas dress. I had already promised her. So by the time I'm done pleating, I went ahead to check if the waist of the skirt works. So after I checked, it was a little bit more, but I would gather it a lot more later, right? This is what the pleats look like. Don't forget, gathering is fine. So now I'm going to bring the organza layer and I will just sew it on top of the satin like so. I'll follow it with the organza layer, right? And don't forget that I had already sewed the satin as a skirt as well, just like I did to that net. So I sewed the organza layer on top of it. You have to be careful as I'm trying to keep all the raw edges facing, not to like squeeze into each other, right? So, and I ran out of thread a lot on this project. After the organza layer, I did 2 layers of organza and then I followed it with like 3 layers of tulle net. So this is what the tulle net is. As at now, I've not joined the tulle to the organza and satin layer, so I'm bringing the organza and satin layer so that I can lay the tulle layer on top of it and sew together, right? Now what I'm going ahead to do is the point where I'm not going to be adding zipper on every joining all the layers to add zipper, right? So the organza and satin layer, I'm just going to hem the zipper side, like I'll double fold and I'll sew on top of that zipper side, right? So that that side is nice and clean. So don't forget, I just left about 6 inches, so that's just the 6 inches that I'm going to be sewing. I'll do the same thing for the other side.
Never slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit.
So you can see this is what it looks
If you
like,
wanna play
right?
tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. everything I do, so
layer or
instinctive
the
and so
next layer,
passionate. Every word I
right? But I
move so
have
descriptive
3
like an
layers
adjective.
of
I
net,
got a
and then I'll
vendetta
join
against
it
people who
completely.
patented being
So
negative
this
when
is
you should
it.
be
What I'm
getting
going to
after
do
it.
is to leave out
I got
about
facts over
1
facts
inch
over
or
tracks. This and that, spitting slow,
1.5,
spitting
2
fast. I
inches,
could
whatever
roast, I
you
could
like,
gas. Think I'm
for my
okay at
zipper
last, but I don't
allowance
know if that
on the
can
neck.
erase all
Then
the
I'll
past
start
and the
joining it
pettiness.
together.
A reflection
So
of
don't
the
forget, this
emptiness,
is the width
hilarious. You
of the
think you're worth my
skirt,
time, you're
right?
delirious,
So I'll just go
mysterious,
ahead
because you
and
are
join
behind a fake
nicely
exterior,
and
inferior. You
gradually.
know I'll always be a bit superior.
The
Get off of
same
me, this ain't
thing
no
I
humble
left
brag. I
1
want you
inch
to
on
hear
the other
words, you
side
can
for
say them
zipper.
back.
I'll
I
do the
want you
same
to
thing
feel
on
free
this
from the
extreme,
chains
and
that
this is
last,
what
and to believe
the
in what you
lower part
got,
of
it
the
was
skirt
built to
or the
last,
tutu
yeah.
looks like, right? So you can see it's all beautiful. Black is such a beautiful color. Like the lighting was not even allowing you to see the texture of the black, but damn, this was beautiful.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't
Now
take
back to
shit.
my
I got
sewing
no
machine. I'm
love
going to
for
be
the
joining
fakeness. If you wanna play tough
the
and wanna hate
neckline,
this,
the front
I'll always show
neckline on my
up and
dress.
make a
I'll add
statement. I
honey.
don't ever slow
Then
up,
you can
no I
decide
don't
not
take
to
shit.
add.
I
I just
got no
added that
love
to
for
keep
the fakeness. If you wanna
my
play tough and wanna
keep
hate
my
this,
lining
I'll always show
on
up
one
and make
side
a
as well, so
statement.
that it doesn't show. So I went ahead to top. See, you can skip the hemming bone layer step if you don't mind. So this is what I did. You can see the front is nice and curvy. I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side.
Irresponsible, but they're always possible. If you just believe, you could be so remarkable. Thoughts in my head, a collage and they spread. I'll be great one day, going off of my meds. No, I'm not giving up, no, I'm not giving in. I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind. I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it. I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it. I'm chasing it.
Now I'll go ahead and join my bodies together, right? So I'll move the lining layer aside, then I'll join my back side to my front side. Now using my sewing allowance, I'm just going to go ahead and close my side seam, and then I'll bring the other front and do the same thing as I did. Move my lining layer, and then I'll close my side as well. Then I'm going to go ahead and open it for you to see. Now by the time I match it like this, you can see that the supplies neck is coming out really nice. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to join what I did here. I just went ahead to join some things, even though I later took out some of the seam, but I made a mistake of joining my downside of my bodies to the front side, right? Which I shouldn't do that, but I just wanted, I could have edited it and taken it out of this video, but I wanted you to see so that you don't end up making the same mistake. Reason being that the supplies neck, I needed to sew the blouse entirely different, and then I'll make the skirt side different before joining it. But I wanted to like close off all the seam, but I didn't think through it properly, so I ended up with a mistake. So I think I'm going to repeat this style again in another video, and then I'll show you. That one will be more centered on how to sew it with all your sewing allowance, being like inseam sewing allowance. fixed my zipper and I went ahead to close off my back neckline with the lining. You remember it was just the front side I did that for at first, but I now went ahead to do the reason that I did the front is first and left the back was because of the zipper. This was the point where I discovered that I made a mistake, because finishing off the front of the dress was becoming an issue, right? But you can see the way I put in my zip, everything is looking nice, and on the inside as well, so you can see everything is turning out nice except for the problem that I told you. So I went ahead to, let me just allow you to enjoy the process, right? But this is me just closing in the side seam of the lining piece, just like I did to the side seam of the front piece, right? So I did the same thing to the other side of the lining, joining the two linings together. That's the front and the back, right side facing each other. Then I'll take out my sewing allowance and I went ahead to sew. So this was the point where I loosened the lower part of the skirt of the dress, right? And then I discovered that the bodice was too big, so I went ahead to take in more allowances. So that's why I'm loosening the side, so that by the time I'm done I can iron the seam allowances open. So I just went ahead to take in extra allowance that I need to take for the bodice to be the size of the kid, right? Then the first seam line, I'll go ahead and loosen it. Now what I did is to measure the entire body to check, make sure the overlapping side works as well. Then when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead to join the shoulder of the dress. I'll cut out all the excess allowances. Sorry, I'll just turn the dress to the wrong side and close off from the shoulder all the way to the armhole, because I'm not going to be fixing a sleeve on this dress. So I just first of all closed off my armhole. When I'm done sewing it, now you can use as much seam allowance as you want, but you have to be careful so that you don't use up to 1 inch. Some people who use a lot of allowance, the reason is because it's going to make your armhole wider than it should. So I made notches and I turned it out to the right side. Then I turned the other side and did the same thing. I took my sewing allowance, which I'm not even taking up to 1/2 inch sewing allowance, right? So you make sure that the both seam lines of the side are lined before you turn to the other side. I trim off my excesses and I make a lot of notches. You want to make notches to be as close as possible, so that when you flip it over it can lie properly and you can give it a nice press for it to not look stressed. So by the time I'm done, I'm going to go ahead to join my shoulder. So what I did was to make right side facing each other like this, and or wrong side facing each other. I put my hand inside one of the panels, right in between the lining and the main fabric. Then I grab the back side inwards and bring it out. What you want to do is to get, you tuck one shoulder inside the other, but the right side should be facing the right side, right? Like so. So I'm just trying to arrange it so that I get the beginning properly. Then I went ahead to close off my shoulder. By the time you open it with this method, you see that everything is inside, both on the right side and on the wrong side. You have a clean seam. So you can see this is what it looks on the right side and then the wrong side, which is nice and clean. I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side as well. Then I'll go ahead and sew down that point. I'll just go ahead and sew down my lining on my waist side to the main bodies and trim off the excesses. Then you remember that notch that I made initially, I mistakenly trimmed it off, so it was giving me difficulty trying to find it out, but I eventually figured it out. So don't make that mistake on your own. So this is what it looks like now, the upper side. So I'm just going to have to measure so that I find where the crisscross is. I just crossed it and I stitched it over so that it can sit nicely for me to come and join the skirt part. At this point, the upper side was done and it was beautiful. Guys, this dress looked finer in person. So by the time I'm done, I just brought the lower part of the skirt and made a notch on the midpoint of the skirt for me to know. So that's holding it from the zipper side to find the notch, and I did the same thing for the upper side of the blouse. I just held it down, side seam facing side seam, zipper facing zipper. I made a notch, then I matched the two notched points and I went ahead to sew it down, right? So I just went ahead to sew my skirts to my blouse. So this is what it looks like, but the zipper is not yet finished because don't forget the zipper ended at the upper side. So I just went ahead to continue sewing the zipper into the skirt side, right? So I continued stitching the zipper to go down to that 6 inches point that I left open.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead.
So when I was done, I added crinoline on the first layer of the net or the tulle that was there. I just went ahead to add crinoline so that it gives the downside a little bit of vavavoom there. So if you don't know how to fix crinoline, I'm going to be linking a video where I extensively taught on how to fix crinoline on a dress. So do ensure to watch that video, then you come back here. So that was it for the dress. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, guys. Look at this dress, guys. Just look at this beauty. Oh my goodness. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get notified whenever I have a new video up on the channel. And I forgot to tell you, I just threw on this accessory on it. So see you in my next video, guys. Bye.